thing is to do a quick check that everybody is in the right place. This is the track that's discussing place-based education strategies in Kalamazoo and elsewhere. We have a great fourth panel today for you, Vaughn Washington, who was actually here last year. So if you were here last year, you might have heard Vaughn speak then. But Vaughn's going to go a little deeper into what the Kalamazoo Promise is and what its results have been in the 12 years?
12 years now.
12 years it's been in operation. So in addition to currently being the executive director of community relations at Kalamazoo Promise, he was formerly the principal of Kalamazoo Central High School, which is the main feeder, I assume, it's one of the main feeders of the Promise program. As well, today we're going to have Bridget Timmeney. Bridget is a program administrator and researcher at the W.E. Upjohn Institute for Employment Research, and I assume we'll talk a little bit about what the research behind Kalamazoo and like initiatives is. We have Dawn DeLuca, who's the coordinator for Health, Equity, and Community Affairs at Western Michigan University, and Sylvia Thompson, who is the executive director of Dorado Promise. So with that, I'm sure, Vaughn, you have a structure to how you want to do this, and then we want to make sure that we leave at least about 15 minutes for Q&A, but it can be longer, time permits.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
All right, final round, home run, coming to home plate, whatever you want to call it. So I'm Vaughn Washington. I'm with the Kalamazoo Promise. Our goal today is to share a little bit about what the Promise program means. You have myself. You also have our researcher that's going to be here telling us all about it. They've been with us the entire time. Sylvia Thompson and the Dorado Promise, who kind of really came in and padded their scholarship after ours. So it gives you an idea about how two different programs are working. And then Dawn DeLuca, who's working with students, Promise students, in a program that is specific for them to help them look at health careers and various other careers. So we want to make it, it's going to be quick. This is going to be like speed dating. We know that we're at the end of the mile, but we also want to give you some information about what we got going. So, and then we'll probably have an opportunity for questions right at the end. So, being a part of the Kalamazoo Promise, just imagine, if you will, to set the stage. It's 12 years ago. You're at a school board meeting. I know all of you attend all of your school board meetings, so you know what this looks like. So you're at a school board meeting, and the superintendent sits down and gives us an announcement and says that everybody that graduates from this school district will have their tuition and mandatory fees paid at any in-state public college or university. So there's silence, just like this. People trying to figure out what's going on. Then all of a sudden people are crying. They're jumping up and down. It's all over the place when it sets in. What does that mean? Imagine your school district where you are. If you have children, or if you were in there or in the district, what would that mean for your district? And what do you think that would mean for your city if it was announced right now that everybody that graduated had a college scholarship? For many communities across the country, and there are over 80 plus programs that we're aware of now, since we started 12 years ago, they think it's a way to resurrect and save their city. I don't know if you were in the session. I got a chance to ask those mayors what they thought about education and the role that education played. It's very important for us because as of right now, and I'll put through some slides, but we're really more in conversational, but because I stand before you now, $100 million has been paid out in tuition and fees. $100 million. What do you think that would mean for your community if $100 million went into human capital? It'd be very interesting. We heard a lot of those mayors and people that were speaking talk about how important they thought human capital was. So we're excited to be here today. I always put believe it up there because people just don't believe it. If you were in Kalamazoo right now and you walk down the street, someone would say, that thing's still going? It's just too good to be true, right? And a $100 million investment. But we have over 4,000 plus students that have gone to school using their Promise Scholarship already. It's quite a few. They get to go to some of the most prestigious colleges and universities in the country that we have in Michigan, and we're excited about it. It's set up to go on forever. Okay, so this just keeps getting better. There was some thought that was put behind this. It's to go on forever. So babies that are being born right now in Kalamazoo, that live within the boundaries, that go to the Kalamazoo Public Schools, have a college scholarship. What does that mean? We know what the tuition is going to look like then. It's not going down anytime soon that we're hearing about it. So babies that are being born right now have a scholarship that's set up to go on in perpetuity. The donors are anonymous. Most people want to know who they are. Somebody in here might even be Googling right now, who the heck has money in Kalamazoo? We have a lot of philanthropy that is there, a lot of industry, but they're anonymous right now. I couldn't tell you, I've never been in a room with these individuals. I've worked for the Promise for 4 years. Before that, I worked in education for 22 years, and I was in the room when the superintendent announced it as a high school principal. Imagine what my thoughts were. This meant something different to everybody that was in the room, especially that young lady who was standing there crying, and she was crying because she had been accepted to the University of Michigan, the college of her choice, the dream. But because of her family situation, she was going to go to the local community college. She was going to try to get it together then and hopefully get into Michigan 3 years later. In one announcement, she was able to fulfill her educational dream. So that was pretty special. So to be able to get the scholarship, you must graduate from a Kalamazoo Public School. We have 3, including our alternative school. And yes, if something happens and you just have a hard time in the traditional setting, and you end up in an alternative school and or another school that may have a little more of a disciplinary component to it, we honor you as well. You still will receive the scholarship. You must be a resident within the boundaries of the Kalamazoo Public Schools. The boundaries cover 4 jurisdictions. So it's not just the city of Kalamazoo. A lot of people think you have to live in the city, but within the boundaries. So the donors took care to make sure that whatever we do here is going to take care of our city. And when you hear from our colleagues that have put it up, they have some different parameters that they have that have even expanded upon what the Kalamazoo Promise is. You must have at least all of your high school years. So you have to be in the district at least grades 9 through 12. If you're there grades 9 through 12, you get 65% of your tuition and fees paid. If you're there K12, it's 100%. And then there's a graduated scale in there. So what did we find out? We found out there's some people that still had, either they wanted a faith-based education for their children, or they still believed in maybe the school district they were in, or that they could do something a little bit different in another school district that may be better for their kids. They go there until 8th grade, they come to us in 9th grade. But you need to be there at least 9 through 12 to get 65%. You can break it up in different ways. It's a 4-year scholarship, so how it works is, this is not basically just for your bachelor's degree, so I'm going to try to get at some of the questions I know you'll ask. What about those who aren't ready to go to college and or a 4-year degree is not for them? We pay for 2-year certificate training if you want, whatever that is, if it's 6 months, if it's 2 years. So certificate training so you can get skills, go right into the workforce. We pay for associate's degrees, bachelor's degrees, but it turns out to be that we will pay for 130 credits. 130 credits, you have 10 years to use this scholarship. So they have taken care to say that life can get in the way. So we have some that go to the military, some that start school, it's just not for me right now, or I've got a tough situation, but I have 10 years to utilize my scholarship. 130 credits, a bachelor's degree, or 10 years, whatever comes first. Whatever comes first. But we had students in the 10th year that were still trying to finish up and utilize their scholarship. So the students that are coming in right now were kindergartners. The ones that will graduate this year were kindergartners when this was announced. Can you imagine having a kindergartner at that time? You probably were just praying the whole time, it just didn't end, right? And now you're here, and you're going to be able to use this scholarship. It covers tuition and mandatory fees. We're a first dollar scholarship. I don't know if I mentioned that yet. Whether your family makes $2 or $2 million, we are paying your tuition and fees. That's a big one. A lot of scholarships are graduated, and you say, well, what's the difference? What happens? Some are middle to last dollar. So some scholarships, which are fantastic, will consider your financial aid, will consider any other scholarships, and then add on and supplement you, which is fantastic. For us, we go straight all the way, universal, 100% tuition, mandatory fees. That way, if you get other flexible money, if you're familiar with financial aid, Pell Grants, it's flexible. You can pay room and board. You can pay for some of the other expenses that may get in the way. Other barriers can be removed so you can utilize your scholarship. And then there's an appeal process for students going to their senior year. Suppose you're in 10th grade. Your family, your mom and dad split up. You have to move. Maybe there's an incident. Maybe something happens. You have to move outside the boundary for 3 months or 4 months. And then you come back in. You can appeal to us, and we take a look at your whole body of work, how many years you have been there, and then we can make the decision. We've even awarded GED candidates. So for students that the GED is the best route and the only way for them to go, we've awarded you if you received a GED. Makes it pretty special. So what's been happening? Right now, 90% of all KPS graduates are eligible for the Promise. When it first started, the numbers were around 60-something% of those that were in the school system. That means people came in. The first year it was announced, when that superintendent made that announcement, the next school year, pretty much 1,000 students came into the district. So the 5 years prior, they had lost $15+ million. They were losing close to 130 students a summer in flight to other districts. You probably have seen this maybe where you are. If this is a problem where you are, this stopped it cold in its tracks, and 1,000 students came into the district. Maybe they just stayed home, they came from other places, but we have people moving in. This district is the only urban district in the state of Michigan that's growing, and one of the only districts in the state of Michigan, when Michigan was having great flight out of it as a state, it stopped it cold in its tracks and people are here. So that's one of the things that the research will show you. Hey, people stuck around and they're in the schools. 1,500 students will be enrolled. So right now as we speak, we got about 1,500 students finishing up finals, taking classes and doing their thing. Certificates around 84, associates 192, over 1,000+ bachelor degrees. You look at this and you go, certificates, man, it seems like a lot more students. Because we hear about this workforce, there's jobs. If there's a manufacturer in here, you're probably saying, I got nobody to come work for me. But there's a disconnect somewhere, and we see that right there in that certificates, because you could go right there, use your money to get a certificate, and go be working in wind, alternative energy, any number of things, CNC operator, welding. There's a little bit of a disconnect there. That's another conversation that needs to be had, because we provide that opportunity. Says 90, now we're at 100 million going into this final semester. $100 million has been invested in this, over 4,000+ students. Some of the households have had over $150,000 because of the number of students they have. We have 2 sets of triplets in school right now. All their tuition and fees is being paid. Some over $100,000. Our projection is we're spending a little over $14 million a year right now in tuition and fees for the students. These anonymous donors are fantastic. I mean, it's just remarkable. They don't ask for anything back for the student in return. 2 pieces of paper to get your scholarship. One that says you graduate and where you graduated from. The other says, where have you been accepted to college? These are the 2 things. It's easier than getting a driver's license to get this money to go to school. Very impressive. Average award, and we use 06 to 2016, but you can see the average amount of money that's gone up. Tuition and fees continue to rise in colleges and universities, and we expect to pay even higher than $50,000 for students to go ahead and complete, for those that make it through, all the way through their 4-year degrees, which paying that much. The highest tuition bill we paid came in last year, $90,000. It was for a student that went to the Art Institute and finished an art degree. 60% of the students have used it and gone to a community college. Now, suppose you decide you're going to go to Harvard, Yale, you're going to go somewhere out of state. You're going to go to El Dorado, for crying out loud, some Arkansas school. You're going to go out of state and not use your Promise scholarship. You're going to do what they got for you. You can come home in the summer and you take summer courses. So if you come visit your folks in the summer, you come home in the summer, whatever it is, you can take summer courses, we'll pay for your classes. We have all kinds of ways that you can put this together, that this thing can supplement you and help you make it through. You can piece it up, you can figure out ways to use it with your aid. Retention and completion after 4 years, slightly over 80% for students starting at universities, much higher. So we know students that go to 4-year schools, hang in there a lot harder and have a better opportunity to complete than many of them that go to our community colleges. And if we have time, we'll talk about some of the relationships we have with our community colleges to help make sure that students have better retention and continue to complete there. Because every year, 1/3 of our students go to Western Michigan University. We have a university right in town. 1/3 of the students go to the local community college, Kalamazoo Valley Community College, and 1/3 of the students go all throughout the state to various colleges and universities. 2 years ago, we announced that there were 15 private schools in the state of Michigan that students could use their scholarship at now. It was public schools at first. 15 private, those great liberal arts educations. I'm a product of a smaller liberal arts school. So some students are going to do a little bit better at those schools. We provide an opportunity for them to be a part of it in partnership. You might say to yourself, boy, they're a lot more expensive. How'd you guys manage that? Well, we took one of the tuition rates at the University of Michigan, one of the higher ones. So let's just say $14,000. And we agreed to pay that. Those schools agreed to make up the difference to make a student whole. So for Kalamazoo College, which is one of the highest tuition rates in the state of Michigan and probably in the country, is still paying $22,000 per student. Because they're up around 40 some odd $20,000. So they're paying 20-something to have the students come in to have a part and being a part of this program. A pretty unique partnership.
Did you say 15 colleges? Private colleges?
15.
Okay.
Yep. Enrollment in KPS has increased 24%. That's huge in itself. Most schools are losing in enrollment. There's various schools that are opening, whether it's your local charter school, whether it's we're going to another state because we want something better. But enrollment in this urban district has grown 24%. State revenue has increased by more than 18 million. So as they lost that 15 million over the first 5 years, now the revenue is back to the district. They're over 18. We are a per pupil grant that comes from the state. That's how our schools are funded. And we have 4 new schools, the first in 35 years. So some people want to know the economic development benefits that came along with this. That's how you can reach me. We'll tell you about that a little bit later. And let's see if we're moving on. So before we move on, a couple things I'd like to mention about the Kalamazoo Promise. One thing we know right off the bat, and data will show, that a scholarship is not enough. So it seems really, really good. And I know a question would be, man, it can't be all roses, peaches, and cream. And it's not. But what it does do, and because it is funded the way that it is and in perpetuity, we get to focus all of our effort and energy on where the gaps are. So we've hired some people right now to work in business collaboration. People always want to know, all right, is anybody coming back after they graduate? Is anybody staying here and working? Is that a benefit? We have someone that's working in that and going to start tracking that over the next 10 years. People want to know what happens to kids who start school and don't keep going. We have someone who's going to wake up every single day. They're going to work in that track so that they're trying to find those students and what's going on. And then we have someone that works and goes deep in to those high areas that are in our community that we struggle in. So poverty initiatives, poverty reduction initiatives, generational poverty, those that are working with infant mortality, because we have a high rate of infant mortality in Kalamazoo. You name it, we've got someone that's at the table for those things. And people love Promise program being at the table for those initiatives with those nonprofits. I thought it was very interesting to hear that session about nonprofits working and cutting down crime. Hadn't really even thought about that and gotten into that, and we have a lot of nonprofits in our town. We have crazy philanthropy in Kalamazoo, and we want to take advantage of it. But what you've seen here, you might think it might be a little more after a $100 million investment. But one of the things that hasn't changed in Kalamazoo over the time is poverty. If we're not impacting poverty, I don't know what we're doing. And so we're going to have to look at that, and that has to be an intentional strategy. You would think this would solve a lot of ills, but it doesn't right away. And so those are the things that we're going to be working on. So I'll turn it over to Bridget. Bridget is going to tell us a little bit more about the things.
Very good. I thought I'd start, just explain a little bit about what the Upjohn Institute is and our partnership with the Kalamazoo Promise folks. And it's an interesting story too, because it's rooted in the pharmaceutical industry, but the Upjohn Institute was founded by a man, W.E. Upjohn, and he was kind of a first-generation place-based strategy kind of guy. He was the one who invented the swallowable pill. And and this was around the turn of the century, and he started to accumulate his wealth, the Depression started. And he saw throughout Kalamazoo a lot of dislocated workers. And he decided to use his land to the benefit of the community, and he opened it up to dislocated workers to start a community garden. And it was with those gardens that people were able to either grow food for their family or grow food to sell. But it's part of that philanthropic nature that is in Kalamazoo that started very early. And in 1935, he started the Upjohn Institute to study the causes and effects of unemployment. We have a staff a little over 100, and we have this unique situation where half of our staff administer their practitioners, and they administer federally and state-funded workforce development programs. So we have the practical side of a 4-county area, still doesn't meet the size of Baltimore, but a 4-county area large enough that we can do some control studies in and learn from. The other side is where this Promise research is rooted in the research division. And I indicate here that we have 11 PhD economists. And I say that because I just want you to know the rigor of the work that's done and the studies that I'm going to talk about today. They're labor economists. Their expertise spans from international setting, across topics of quality pre-K and return on investment, to workforce development, economic development, unemployment insurance. But that's where this research and this partnership is rooted. So I thought it was important that we get a real clear understanding of what a Promise program is. Vaughn talked about this a bit. We've defined it with this criteria here. It's not just a scholarship program. Promise programs are place-based. So they usually have some kind of geographical boundary, which varies all across the country. It could be a school district, in the case of Kalamazoo. And Sylvia will talk about her place base. It could be the community college catchment area. It could be a county. It varies, but geographically bounded. It also includes some kind of enrollment or residency requirement. And Vaughn talked about the sliding scale of K through 12, but students need to be part of the district 9 through 12. The Promise programs are intended to create, in our definition, an early awareness program. So we're getting at kind of the cultural change that's intended with these programs. And also with that cultural change, it's not just within the school district, but it's across the communities. Promise programs are intended to catalyze some alignment, cross-sector alignment with the nonprofit agencies, the out-of-school time programming, the business sector, and from secondary to post-secondary. And as Vaughn indicated, Promise programs are long-term and predictable. And that's key in developing trust so that people's behaviors change. So if you have a program that you're unsure about its longevity, a family who has small children may not move to the district because they're skeptical about the ultimate benefit that they may receive. So that's our definition of a Promise program. And Promise programs given all that, share many different goals or similar goals. And we've put them into 3 buckets here. They're the K through 12 outcomes that we're looking at, building the college-going culture, stimulating the school district improvement, and stopping that decline, too, that we see that's so prominent in these urban districts. There are those post-secondary outcomes that we're talking about, beyond reducing costs, but simplifying the process so that we can then work on retention and persistence, and then the community outcomes. We're trying to catalyze engagement. So it's not just about what's happening in the school for that student's success, but it's about the community catalyzing around the success. So Promise programs also vary along many different dimensions. You'll see here in a little bit, we've developed a database of Promise programs, and using that definition, that's not just a scholarship program, we have a little over 90 programs across the country. And it varies on who's eligible, whether it's a merit-based program, needs-based program, or universal in the case of Kalamazoo and El Dorado.
And I know I said 80, so leave it up to the researcher to give me the right number, so thank you very much.
Well, and part of it is that it's growing every day, really. And also, which post-secondary institutions can these eligible students pursue? Sometimes it's just a community college. Sometimes it's, in the case of El Dorado, I don't want to steal your thunder, but they can go anywhere in the United States. So also how much funding is available. A lot of that has to do with how much revenue you can, resources you can generate in your community, but it also has to do with kind of the need that you define in your community that you're trying to address. A duration of the program, we see it anywhere from one first semester to these 10 years available through the Kalamazoo Promise. And here, this is a very important point. What kind of supportive services are provided? Not only to the students K through 12, but as they make that transition to higher ed, what are those supports? And what are the supports that are helping them persist and complete that degree? And then where is it housed? We have great admiration for the El Dorado program. The program is housed in the public school. Sometimes it's in a foundation, sometimes it's in the city, but those are some of the dimensions that vary across Promise programs. And here's the growth of the Promise programs across the country. You can see there are pockets there, kind of in the Midwest, the Rust Belt, East, kind of around the New Haven Promise that developed early, and other programs spawned out of that. And El Dorado, you can see the growth there in the southeast. And then more recently, we've seen tremendous growth in California. We're kind of waiting to see what happens there too, because there's some legislation in the works that would make community college free to students in California. Then you can see the dearth of programs along the Rocky Mountain Range. So what about the research and our partnership over time with Kalamazoo Promise? We've been working, 12 years now with the Kalamazoo Promise. We see our role as researchers, but also conveners of the research community. We've convened other researchers around the country who are doing work in New Haven and Pittsburgh and El Dorado, say yes to education, to hear about, given the designs in those communities, what are they learning, what works and what doesn't work. We have convening of practitioners. We've had 9 convenings, again, so we can learn from each other. What's working, what isn't, how do our programs differ, what are our common struggles, and one that we heard a lot about today that resonates is disaggregating the data so that we know, yes, we have these grand outcomes, but it doesn't necessarily mean everybody, every community is experiencing those positive outcomes. So I spoke about the new searchable database. It's about a month out. If you go to our website, upjohn.org, you can see, take a look at these 90 programs and how they differ in funding and all of the different dimensions, and how the effort has grown over time. Looking at those programs, we thought it would be good to provide an overview just across the board of the Promise programs. We see soft changes in attitudes and aspirations almost immediately. They're detectable. Some of the programs, or most of the programs, find some kind of K through 12 enrollment increase during the first year. It really depends on the robustness of the program. The universal programs, of course, see the highest increases. We see very limited effects so far on high school graduation rates. I'm thinking Sylvia might talk about this in her community. But behavior and grades, we see commonalities across the board of improvement, both in terms of suspension behavior, attendance behavior, course-taking behavior. College enrollment increases obviously are very typical, but again, locations are still working on that persistence and completion variable. Community impacts, they're hard to detect sometimes because of the context. For an example, with the Kalamazoo Promise, it was announced, and then shortly after that, the 2008 recession occurred. So it was very difficult for a long time to really tease out effects on home values and crime. Our work right now, though, is kind of exciting. We have enough cohorts moving through that we can now look at and start to discuss the workforce outcomes and how these Promise programs are impacting on employment effects for the students involved. So how about in Kalamazoo? Again, we're going to divide these into the 3 different buckets. K through 12, as you can imagine, we've talked about the increased enrollment in the district increase in standardized test scores, improvements in behavior. Again, still struggling within KPS to impact that high school graduation rate. In the last couple of years, we've seen it inch up. We hope that's a continued trend. And also, of course, the increase in the number of students attending four-year institutions. So we saw a bump up from those students who previously might have attended a community college because of cost, now able to make that jump to a four-year institution. And then taking a look at the post-secondary impacts. I think Vaughn talked about this. 2/3 of our students, they attend the two local institutions. We have a four-year research institution along with the community college, and more recently now a small private liberal arts. So 41% of the students use their scholarship at the local community college. And again, they might start there, transfer to a four-year, they might come back, take some summer classes at the community college. So the local community college has been just imperative, the kind of alignment, the work that the Kalamazoo Promise staff have done at the community college and the load that they've taken because of the Promise. Through our research, we found that Promise is used at the same rate by poor students as well as non-poor students, but we find that the poor students are more likely to attend the community college. College enrollment rose 8 percentage points within the first 6 months of high school graduation, and 9 percentage points it rose for attendance at four-year colleges. We've seen an impact on completion rates for bachelor's degrees, and 28% for all credentials. This is a big one too, the improved success in developmental coursework. I raised this, we included this because it's an alignment example with the local community college. Again, they took a brunt of the work, students that perhaps necessarily weren't prepared for college. They expanded this Student Success Center to help accommodate students with advising. And I think that has impacted the GPA and persistence rates. And again, these are often the questions asked the most, are the community impacts. They're the hardest to tease out. Some of them will become clearer over time as we have more cohorts to look at. But my colleagues at the Upjohn Institute studied return on investment, who looked at the nature of the degrees students were pursuing, cost of college, rate of completion, and the future earnings, and determined on average there's 11% return on investment in this investment. We also looked at, there's often a question of, is this bringing more population to the city? And this again was hard to tease out. We looked at 4 different programs, Promise programs, and found that there was a 1.7% increase in population due to the Promise program. We found that district exit rates fell by 30% post-Promise. So it talks about the stickiness that the Promise program can add to a district. And Vaughn mentioned too the new school construction. Some of our schools were in sad shape. This is a big deal, having 4 new schools. So key takeaways. It's important to remember that every Promise program is different. When we consult with communities interested in replicating a Promise program, we really like to help facilitate that process about what what need the community is trying to address. From there, that shapes design and then of course the ultimate outcomes that you're striving for. The program structure needs to relate to these goals, but it's so important to keep that that simple, that design simple, because then that plays into your messaging and the trust that you're building, the behavior you're trying to change within the community. One example of this, these various kind of distributional impacts, you can compare the Kalamazoo Promise, a universal program, to another program in Michigan, the Muskegon Promise. In Muskegon, it's merit-based. 3.5 grade point average is required, and the kind of outcomes, the kind of draw that you get, very, very different from a universal program. We haven't really talked yet about how this is also coming to the forefront for state initiatives, but in New York, they now have the New York Excelsior program. It is a generous program. However, a caveat is that you have to come back and live and work in the state of New York. If you don't, then the penalty is that your promise then becomes a loan that you have to repay. So again, very different distributional effects with that kind of design. So money and messaging are important. And as Vaughn said, we can't emphasize enough that alignment from the community is key.
Thank you, Bridget. And for anybody in here, just imagine, what if you went to school and you didn't have student loans after you got done? So when doing surveys, we find that many of the students finish with little to no debt. I mean, just that impact alone on even your life or mine, that's a change. That starts to begin to change the conversation in the community. And a lot of people get around it. You start looking at economic development. Western Michigan University gets a third of the students. Every year we're paying them over $5 million in tuition and fees. That's money that's staying local. We're paying over $1 million to the local community college. That's money that's staying local. So $6-7 million of that $14 million that we talked about spending every year is staying right in the community. But then that requires a lot. So to whom much given, much is required. I look at the Kalamazoo Promise for us, and we'll talk about different ways that these come up, because some scholarships that are Promise programs, they pay $1,000. You know, what they can pay is, we're able to give $1,000 to our local students, and sometimes there are ways where, like in Muskegon, you have to have a 3.5 grade point average. Now, if I have to have a 3.5 grade point average, for the most part, I probably have qualified for most of the colleges and universities, but their 3.5 grade point average allows you to get a scholarship to go to the local community college. Well, a 3.5 will get me into almost all colleges and universities, four-year schools in the state of Michigan. So sometimes you can structure a program in a way when you think, well, they got to be motivated, they got to want it, they got to, all these conversations come around the table. That's why Promise programs aren't just everywhere. They come around the table. You've got to be very clear in the mission and how many you're trying to get in, not keep out, and what you really think those motivations are. Because a student that graduates with a 1.9 grade point average, 2.0 grade point average, that work their way up from starting with a 0.0 grade point average by failing all their freshman courses, you don't want to leave them out. So there's a number of things to consider when you're putting the scholarship together, but a lot of it is financially, it's situated in how much money you're going to be able to offer and what you're going to be able to do. No discredit to any program. We feel very fortunate to be in the situation that we're in, but if your community is going to put one together, these are kind of conversations you want to hit first. What can we do to make sure we're trying to cover everybody? And Sylvia Thompson is going to right now unveil to you this masterful program in Dorado, Arkansas. That's just been fantastic. Thanks, Bridget.
Let's see if I can make this work right. First, I want to show you where Dorado, Arkansas is, because many of you, it's one of those flyover states, Arkansas is. Very important for you to realize where we are located in the United States. Yes, we're in the rural South, and we are in the very southern part of the state. We're actually 15 miles from Louisiana. That goes to, why I point that is, when I get a little bit further in, I'll show you why we organized our place-based scholarship and the way that we did. Oh, by the way, that line, I'll go back there. That line, Memphis to Texarkana, shows decline of Arkansas. Okay, there's been no growth in that area in the last 15, 20 years in Arkansas. All of our growth is coming from the Bentonville, Northwest, Little Rock, and Northwest Arkansas. Bentonville, of course, otherwise known as Walmart City. Okay, Dorado's perspective, our town was founded in the, actually in the 1840s, but we had a massive boom in 1920 with an oil boom, and we became a very wealthy oil town. In fact, Most of our large public facilities, we have a county courthouse and a federal courthouse, and our big churches and our big pavilions. Most of those were built in the 1920s, and our lovely downtown was built, those buildings were built in the 1920s. Going through the 50s, we continued to grow industrial. Most of these industries were based around oil and oil support, petrochemical, other chemical industries, bromine industries, so things that developed from that. So we've always had a strong industrial base. But so like so much of the rural South, globalization and the service economy made our population shrink. And so we've resulted in lost population. But for example, in 1980, we had a little over 25,000 people in El Dorado, and our now we're a little over 18,000. But we're kind of unique, is that we are a community of 18,000, but we are the corporate headquarters of 3 New York Stock Exchange companies, 2 of which are Fortune 500 companies, Murphy Oil and Murphy USA. Deltic is an outgrowth of the timber industry, of that lands that were held by Murphy Oil. So that's kind of unique in this kind of community. I'm going to go back here just one second. Another thing that's unique about our community is the fact that we're also home to the South Arkansas Art Center, which is an art community, basically the core of our art community, or artistic community, that has been in place for more than 50 years. We also have the South Arkansas Symphony, that is the oldest, largest, longest standing symphony in Arkansas. And I'll point that out because you'll see what we're going to do with that. But our first moves really focused on education when we started looking at how do we move this needle, what's going on in our community, how do we move this needle. In 1995, the announcement of the El Dorado Education Foundation, they raised over $3 million, and it was the first capital campaign in our community that did not involve a brick and mortar building. It was raised to help teachers in our district. It really became a growth of a dinner conversation about, you know, I'm buying weekly readers for wherever my kid is in school, I'm buying weekly readers for that class. But isn't that sad, because my kid can only be in this one class. There are 2 other 3rd grade classes. There are 5 other 7th, you know. How can we do that? So that El Dorado Education Foundation. And then in 1997, Murphy Oil Corporation announced the Murphy Education Program. Now the MEP program is different from the El Dorado Promise. It began 10 years earlier. But it's a financial incentive for students for academic achievement. Murphy gives money to AP students' scores on their AP exams, and the teachers who teach those students on their ACT, their SAT scores, also first grade teacher and end of year, and also award academic letter jackets, which look just exactly like that football letter jacket, except they had the lamp of knowledge on them, and you had to have a 3.75 GPA to earn it. So the announcement of the El Dorado Promise in 2007 probably shouldn't have come as a surprise to El Dorado, but it was a huge surprise. Clever Deming, upon hearing from a New York Times or Washington Post, we kind of forget how we heard about that exactly, was given this article about the Kalamazoo Promise. And he looked at it, he was then president and CEO of Murphy Oil, and he looked at it and said, you know, I think we can do that here. They traveled to Kalamazoo, talked to the people there, came back home, and as a total surprise, the community in January of 2007 announced the El Dorado Promise. $50 million was pledged, $5 million over 10 years by Murphy Oil, to educate and send to college every single graduate of El Dorado High School. We so stole Kalamazoo's ideas. Our eligibility requirements are exactly the same, have to be there all 4 years of high school to get the least amount, which is 65. Kindergarten, you get 100. If the amount is based on the most expensive charges of the public school in Arkansas. One difference is that our students can take their scholarship to any public or private accredited university in the United States. Do you remember that little map I showed you of where El Dorado was? Okay. And in fact, the El Dorado Education Foundation had been around for 12 years doing senior surveys. We knew that 20% of our students went out of state to all kinds of colleges. We are very close. In fact, we are closer to the flagship universities of 4 states than we are in distance to our own flagship university. So we knew that we didn't want to leave anybody out. The other thing about it is that it's good for 5 years. You have to start college right after you graduate or go into the military, but it's good for 5 years or bachelor's degree, whichever comes first. It is universal, first payer. If you are a student that has earned a scholarship from a university based on your merits, academic, athletic, whatever, and it covers your tuition and fees, then the Promise funds can go toward your tuition and board or books, things that are on your invoice, and this is what we're paying this year. So, in fact, in the school was almost immediately. After a 15-plus year of declining population in our school district, we saw a 5% increase, and then we've stabilized. Now, that non-growth, that stabilization is really a good thing because surveys have shown us that in our area, all other schools had continued to decline to the point that we would have been probably 15% below now if we had not announced the Dorado Promise. Our school district wholeheartedly accepted this gift that Murphy Oil had given our community by saying, okay, all of our kids can go to college. What are we going to do to make them ready? And they embraced the AP, the Advanced Placement Program. In 2007, we had 5 classes, 5 AP subjects were offered in El Dorado High School, and 150 exams were given. In 2017, we offered 19 advanced placement classes, and over 900 exams were given to a school population of 1,200. Not only that, but we've been recognized by College Board, which supervises the AP program, for not only the increase in number of subjects and classes and tests given, but also the number of socioeconomic disadvantaged students who are enrolled in our classes. To quote our award-winning AP physics teacher, my classroom prior to the Promise used to look like the country club, and now it looks like parks and recreation. We have created a college-going culture. We start talking about going to college prior to our children even enrolling in kindergarten, because I appear at the kindergarten bash for parents and students. And then on the very first day of school, a team, including me, visit every single kindergarten classroom in our district and tell them that they can go to college with the Dorado Promise. That continues all the way up and through with visits and all kinds of things going on. And some of them are just a no cost. One is every Wednesdays are college days in our district. Everything from the administration down to the kindergartners wear college t-shirts. Talk about colleges. At the outside of the door of all our 7th through 12th grade teachers have not only their name, but the colleges their degrees and the colleges that they've attended to keep that conversation going. We have Academic Signing Day. That's when we recognize, the community recognizes and awards all of our El Dorado High School seniors with a community-wide event with a keynote speaker. They come in and our school colors are purple, in case you didn't know. And they all come in their purple robes, and they are given, just like you say, signing with athletics, they're given an El Dorado Promise cap. And then the keynote speaker is also given an El Dorado Promise cap. So we've given El Dorado Promise caps to President George W. Bush, President Bill Clinton, several Arkansas governors, people in higher ed. Speaking of higher ed, the time that we got the most college presidents to come to our academic signing day in the spring was the year we had the CEO of the Dallas Cowboys, who knew that college presidents loved Dallas Cowboys, but apparently they did. And then last year we had Miss America, who happened to be from Arkansas. 85% of our El Dorado High School graduates are eligible and attend college the fall after they graduate from El Dorado High School. And the Promise is taken them there. This is what Vaughn was alluding to. Those little gray dots indicate a college where a Promise recipient or Promise scholar is attending college. And actually I'm behind. If you'll notice, we're missing South Carolina, but I've got a freshman at USC and at Clemson this year, so now we can fill in like all the SECs. Again, we kind of, in the Midwest we don't have many, but we are sending them. Over 2,200 Promise scholars are attending, 131 have attended 131 different colleges in 30 states, have graduated from 39 different out-of-state, almost all of our public universities, as well as most of our private universities. And they're currently attending 73 different colleges. They have graduated from such universities as Vanderbilt and Notre Dame and the United States Naval Academy, the University of Virginia, Texas, the Rice University, almost all of the large flagship universities in the South. How did our community respond? Very importantly, announced in January the Promise. In April, we passed a 1-cent economic development tax. It raised over $32 million over the 8 years. It sunsetted in 2014 and was renewed in 2015 for another 8 years. Property tax was passed, we call it a millage in South Arkansas, Dorado Arkansas, was passed to build a new high school, and that new high school was built. Now that probably wouldn't be that big a deal, except there had not been a millage increase passed for El Dorado Public Schools since Nixon was president. You know, I'm old enough to remember Nixon? Yeah. That was passed in September, and our most current theme that the community has embraced is the El Dorado Festival Events, which is an entertainment project that opened this fall. This is the El Dorado Conference Center, was built as a part of the economic development tax. It houses our local community college administration offices and also serves as a conference center venue for our community. This is a picture of the front of El Dorado High School, a $52 million investment, state-of-the-art. By the end of May, we will have one-on-one computer technology to students. Includes the highest technology, but also safety. Four principals can supervise the entire school from four different locations.
And you can't see it there, but I had a chance to go to El Dorado for their 10-year anniversary celebration. What was impressive to me is that this is the logo for the Promise program. So just when you think this is an education thing, this is a community thing. And this is a community saving thing. And the fact that I think they have it in brick and mortar, that it's up there as a commitment to it, I find that to be extremely exciting. Whenever I see things that we have yet to accomplish in Kalamazoo, having been considered to be the first ones, I always like to take things. So I think that's very special and a tribute to Sylvia and her team.
Well, and if you could expand this picture just a little bit, there's 2 more windows and then 2 more windows, and those are the windows to my office, because I'm actually housed in El Dorado High School. Now, Murphy Arts District. This is our entertainment venue. This is the El Dorado Festival Events has raised over $60 million in private and public funds. It's a 501c3 organization. They decided that creating an entertainment venue was a way to increase economic development in our community. We have an award-winning downtown, main streets, all kinds of national awards. This is right south of downtown in an area that was very definitely declining. The centerpiece basically is the Griffin Building, this one in the upper corner. It was a 1920s, 40s era automotive, like a car dealership. That is now a farm-to-table restaurant with a cabaret. Behind it, in what would have been the garage bay, is now a flexible seating for up to 2,000 venue that can have everything from Broadway shows to hard rock bands. Right beside that is our amphitheater that can seat 8,000. And also has, on the far side, also has bays for a farmer's market. We opened September of 2017, and people who came heard acts from Robert Earl King and Lyle Lovett to the Migos and Ludacris and Train and Brad Paisley. Since that time, let's see, we've had the Beach Boys. We've had, I think the ones I've attended, the Beach Boys, Dennis Quaid, did you know he had a band? He does. Last Saturday night, it sold out to the Chinese Acrobats. So that is just the first stage. And Shopkins and what else? Oh, Kelly Pickler's coming before Christmas. So there's always, and every Thursday night is live music with the cabaret in the Griffin restaurant. And the next phase will include a state-of-the-art and one of the largest water parks in Arkansas, and it'll all be, everything is based around Arkansas's nature. as well as our 1920s, again, back to that boomtown, 1920s era vaudeville movie theater that will seat 850 with balcony seatings. That's where we plan to hold our film festival and bring other type productions in that. And then a 10,000 square foot art exhibit area that will have bring in rotating exhibits and exhibition spaces. Again, you see, back to our roots of arts and culture and making all of this fit our place, which is a very unique place and a very proud place I am to call home, Dorado, Arkansas. There's our contact information for myself, Murphy Oil, the El Dorado Education Foundation, and then Eldo Mad. If you want to see what's going on, go see Eldo Mad. There's always something popping there.
And before we transfer right into just kind of the last portion of this, we want to remind you that we wanted to show you kind of different phases of what a community could do. Once again, not an education thing, this is a community thing. This is a community transformation thing. And if education is the only one that gets the push for it, it's going to be hard to be successful. Everyone in the community has to decide to leverage the community assets to make sure that students are going to be successful. Take pride in it and push the whole thing forward. Now, typically when we have a room like this, one person goes out, we hear from them about 2 weeks from now, and says our community leaders are coalesced around us, and this is going to save our community, come on down. And any one of us would be willing to come down and do that. But that's what communities are really deciding, as those leaders are getting together. And when we challenge those mayors, the other day, we heard the mayors yesterday, it just happened that those 4 mayors, they felt like it was difficult to work with the school system, that there were barriers that existed, that because they had their own school boards, there were things that they weren't going to be able to penetrate into. So public schools weren't really a big part of their community transformation plans. And I would suggest to anyone, they gotta be, they have to be. And we have found some of the same difficulties. Education, and being on the other side of education, hey, look, we don't want nobody in here. We know what we're doing. You're already knocking at us already. You're chipping away at our teachers. Hey, let us be, let us do our thing. But anymore, you're really going to need those folks to come up and be a part of this. Unless you have that philanthropist that says, forget it, we're going to drop dead, we're going to do it. Any other Promise community that we're aware of is fundraising every day. They're going after, they're fundraising, they're having to find those investors. Who are they? That's private industry, let me tell you. Those are the private sector people that are coming in. What do they want? Return on investment. How is this going to get me workforce? How is this going to bring people back? So those questions have to be answered, but believe me, they can be. And so we wanted to demonstrate also the supports that are necessary to help kids be successful. Dawn's briefly going to tell us a little bit about what they do over at the medical school.
Okay, so I'm here to share with you a program that we put in place at the School of Medicine to help support Promise students. We know that we need to scaffold in additional resources, additional supports to help some of our more vulnerable students make sure they get to college completion. So what we're doing at the medical school is kind of, we're benefiting from it as well. A lot of medical schools are adopting pipeline programs to help increase diversity in medicine. We know a lot of providers, healthcare providers look the same. We're not seeing a lot of African American providers, and we at the medical school are trying to address that. And how we're doing that is our early introduction to health career programs. We have 2 of them. One is at the elementary level and one is at the high school level. Our 4th and 5th grade students at Northeastern Elementary, which you can see by the data that's up there, it is a struggling school in a difficult part of town. Our medical students who are required to have an active citizenship class, which is where they go out into the community and they are infused in local organizations to help them understand all parts of the population. Because when they are providers one day, they will be seeing all parts of the population. So we are trying to help them become comfortable and also understand the disparities that exist. Well, my little group, they go out once a month and they spend time in a 4th grade classroom, and they'll eventually move with them to 5th grade. And they talk about different healthcare careers, and they talk about body systems, but more than anything, I have all of my medical students, they wear their white coats there. But they wear jeans, they wear tennis shoes, but they wear their white coats. And it's funny, when they walk in The 4th and 5th grade students they call them doctors. They call them doctors. I had one little girl one day that had to go to her locker. She had to go get something. And she went and she put on her coat that she had in her locker, and she said, "I'm gonna be a doctor one day too." And it was cute. So they go out and they do things like dissect chicken wings and understand different body systems, and we have students learning CPR, and we give them little stethoscopes, and it's a great program, and the hope is that it just gets them thinking about, what am I going to do for a career? Some of them, they may be interested in healthcare. Some of them, after pulling apart a chicken wing and understanding tendons and bones and stuff, not for me. Not for me at all. But at least it's some exposure, and it's getting kids excited thinking about, oh wait, this may be for me too. Because a lot of students, especially those in poverty, and especially those who are first-generation college students, and especially those who live in parts of the community where education isn't valued, they grow up thinking, this isn't for me. This is for those other kids. So we're trying to touch all of our students. Our flagship program is now in its 3rd year. It is a program designed for Kalamazoo Promise 10th grade students. So KPS 10th grade students. They have to meet at least one of these 3 criteria to be admitted into the program. They have to be an underrepresented in medicine minority, free or reduced lunch that helps me understand if it's a low SES situation, or a first-generation college student. We are trying to reach the students who are having trouble. The data has shown that it's not, these students that are in this demographic may be starting college, but not finishing it. So we are working to make sure that they're not only utilizing their promise, but utilizing it and getting a degree. So we have a Saturday Academy program, which is about ready to start, where they come for 4 hours, and they spend time with our medical students in a mini medical school academy. They learn about different body systems, they learn about different healthcare careers. We have a state-of-the-art simulation center at our medical school. We are a fairly new institution, 4 years old, so that means we have the best technology ever, and they get to spend time doing real doctor stuff. Simulations. Our mannequins can sweat and bleed, and it's as close to a real person as possible, and they get to be a part of that. They get to feel like, okay, once again, maybe this is for me. One of my favorite things to do, oh, this is our summer program. They spend 1 week doing biochemistry research at Kalamazoo College. Biochemistry research, where they go in, they put on their lab coat, they put on their goggles, they are keeping journals of things, they are doing things that are not only hands-on, but they're doing things at a high level, and it's making them feel like, once again, okay, maybe this is for me. I just love it. We teach them basic clinical skills, and then at the end of the summer, they get to bring their parents and community members come in, and they get to watch these students practicing their clinical skills on actual patients or volunteers that come in from the medical school. And we have our faculty that come in. These are sheep, heart, and lungs that the students are learning. But what I was saying, my favorite part is when I hand them their scrubs. And they go and they change in the locker room and they come out and something changes in them. I have chills talking about it. It's just such a tangible moment. These students are seeing themselves in this professional attire, and they're thinking, wow, okay, I'm not too far away from possibly wearing these for real. I gotta get my butt in gear in school. I gotta start trying harder, I gotta start doing more. I know what I wanna be now. I was a first-generation college student. There was no talk of going to college. They would support me if I wanted to go. I'd have to figure out how to pay for it, that's for sure. It wasn't something that was being pushed. I had to navigate a lot of that space on my own. Luckily, I had enough drive within me to know I knew the career I wanted to go into, and I knew what I wanted to do, and that's what drove me there. So we are hoping that by having this program in place, a lot of them have that internal motivation that they're not maybe getting at home, and driving them to use their promise and utilize this great gift that our city has given us, well, our donors have given us.
Thank you, Dawn. Yeah, it's important, I think, always to demonstrate that the community has to really step up. And one of the things that's special about what WMed has done is they've made a program and designed it, and it's for Promise students. In our city, we have other high schools. There's private high schools that are in our city. There are there are charter schools in our city. But this is a Kalamazoo Promise program that's designed for the public school. And so what we're doing is asking people to get involved with this grand experiment. Really, that's what it is. We've got this great social experiment. We want to see how this is going to work, and it happens to be Promise Forever. And we want to continue to see how it moves, but everybody else has to kind of pick it up. So anything that you've heard from the mayors, from housing, poverty reduction initiatives, to wage increases, people are talking about all of that in the city because all of that's going to contribute to that type of success. I know that we were already behind coming in on the session. I don't know where we are in time. Do we have time for one question or two? Or we're good?
No, we have time.
We have time for-
We have like about 12 minutes. so-
Okay, anybody have a
Take 2 or 3
question?
questions?
Please, go
Well, I
ahead.
am interested in the fact that the poverty rate has not decreased in Kalamazoo.
Yeah.
So can you say anything more about that? Does that mean the population growth tended to be fairly low income, or, can you say more about that? What you
As
learned
Bridget,
about
yeah,
it?
and as Bridget mentioned, right after it was that, we went into recession.
Okay.
So it was hard. So even more people began struggling. They started to struggle. So now, unless there is a targeted strategy, I think all of us know poverty doesn't just all of a sudden go away. And so there has to be a concentrated effort and a targeted strategy. And we look at this, we look at it on our side as, we got a lot of first generation students. We're trying to break generational poverty. Your grandma was poor, your parents were poor. Now you have a degree, a certificate, you have an opportunity to make money, make a living wage. Boom, we're impacting generational poverty. But haven't seen that on the whole. Now, we have students, that could mean that students are getting their degrees and flying the coop and going somewhere else.
Yeah.
Or, one of the fears that we have is that they're getting degrees coming to the community. Either they have a degree that doesn't translate, and or they're still not finding their way to be inserted back into the community to make that living wage. Is that living wage job there? We gotta take a look at that. And or are they finding a way to get in there? So we're really gonna look at that because what we don't wanna have is a highly educated, impoverished community. And that could be something that could be impacted. So we're working closely with the city and everyone else and the new initiatives that are taking place, and that would be a whole nother session. But some of the initiatives are taking place to bring education together. We leverage the fact that we're paying the scholarship. So, for example, we have students, no fair, $100 million has been paid out, but students' teeth are falling out of their heads, so they can't study in school. So now there's a dental mobile vehicle that goes to all of the schools, does free cleanings and screenings for all the students, any student that comes out. And now there's a medical one of those, 3 doctors' offices on wheels that are going around. That's leveraging those other community assets. So that's kind of what I think. Yep.
Thank you.
And I think the other thing you have to realize is that education is not an instant fix. When you think about it, Kalamazoo Promise has been in place for 12 years. That means the oldest Kalamazoo graduates to receive it are just now 30 years old. You know, they haven't had time to make that change in the, even if they came back, they haven't made that change. And it's like planting oak trees. You know, we're planting seeds to grow oak trees. It's not going to happen overnight. It's going to take time. The fact that it is helpful when those students come back to your community. We have over, I think we're up to 13 teachers in our district are Dorado Promise scholars, and 3 or 4 of them have bought homes because they came out without any debt. So they're 25 to 26-year-old homeowners in our community because they came out of college with no debt.
The other thing going on in our region is that if you look at the mix of openings and the wages, our wages have stagnated. We need to look at that too. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Anyone else?
It would seem in the presentation from Upjohn
it would seem that you captured it, that you really want to be careful when you're setting this up is to clear what problem are you trying to solve? And making sure that you have the supports for that. I mean, the Pittsburgh Promise is horrible. Its impact and what it's doing, it's not well received. And it hasn't really, you know, it hasn't really achieved the benefit that a lot of folks, when it was launched, thought that it would or could. And now they're spinning wheels trying to figure out how to fix it, how to save it. And it's, you know, its support is uncertain because of it's not achieving what they had hoped to do. But it seems like you're having a lot of success in asking the right questions when you set this up.
Right, and hats off to the Promise staff too, who did this kind of reflection of where they've been the first 10 years and what gaps remain. And the commitment to the donors to say, okay, it's phase 2, we're ready to invest in kind of the next generation of the Promise design.
You had a question back here, and then we can come over there.
So I'm from like the Metro Detroit area,
Yeah.
and I was wondering like if there has been any talk of like the program in Kalamazoo spreading to nearby areas, or like why that hasn't really happened since it's been such a success.
Just recently announced the Detroit Promise.
Oh.
So you'll hear about it. The mayor was a big proponent of it, and those types of folks, and so they announced the Detroit Promise. And the Detroit Promise will allow you to go to various community colleges that were within the Detroit area. You must go to the Detroit Public Schools. And so it'll build up. So there was a big announcement about it, but it's going to take that time to resonate, as you can see, to catch on with those folks that are there. But if you Google that Detroit Promise, you'll get it. And in Michigan, I don't know the number, but
There are 10.
there are 10. And 10 promise zones. So the governor, 2 governors ago, initiated what's called promise zones. And so they're tax capture zones. And we have someone from Lansing who is here, some folks from Lansing that are familiar with it as well. And it's kind of a neat deal. Your community has to come together, think this is a good strategy, raise so much money, and then a tax capture, an education tax capture will come in, and then you can fund a scholarship. And all 10 of those promise zones are up and running now. Various challenges, different things, different degrees of what they have, and they set them up. But it has grown. So yeah, look at that Detroit Promise. We had a question that was over here, then I'll come back there, and then I think we have to wrap it up. I think the lady in the white shirt, maybe. Did you have a question? Oh, okay, very good. And then
So
Make sure.
I'm really interested in how racial and socioeconomic disparity plays a role in Baltimore's population and school enrollment challenges. And so I was curious, without knowing, forgive me, the demographics of your city or of your school zone, if the Promise has been effective in overcoming any racial or socioeconomic issues that were existing in your school zone or in your neighborhoods, and have there been a reduction in any of that disparity because of what the Promise has given people?
our schools are almost 50%, 50% African American, 50% Caucasian, and or then there's other in there. I won't get into the extreme numbers, but we're almost 50-50.
And were you always?
Yeah,
before
pretty
and
much, yeah,
after?
even going in when it was announced. So what it has done is it has increased the numbers going to college. So the supports that are there, they have increased students of color, underrepresented students going to college. But as was mentioned, many of them in the increase are going off to our local community colleges. Now, our black females, though, are outpacing even their white male counterparts in going to school and going to college and completion. But we're not seeing that translate into jobs in the community. So we know we need a strategy to make sure that we have that. And some of that has to do with they're going off to college, and maybe I'm going to be doctor, lawyer, engineer, one of these fields that's supposed to really make me do something. I struggle a little bit in math. I go to my counselor. My counselor counsels me into something else. We're seeing this a lot. So we know we have issues in various areas, because it's very easy what we're finding, and I'll just say this, it's very easy to counsel an African-American female into social work, because that's a degree that you can complete and you can finish, but very rarely will they counsel a white male into social work. This is something that we're finding. So we want to make sure that they're getting those degrees and they're going, but it has increased some of that. Now, as far as what's going on in the community, jobs, things like that, I don't know yet. We're very fortunate, once again, that this experiment is ongoing, but this is what we're finding extremely important right now to find out, is what you mentioned. And so we're taking on our first employees. Our office had 2.5 employees for the first 11 years. Now we have 5, we're only confined by space, we're gonna get a larger space, we're gonna get some people and get them on the job and get them going. The thought was at first the community would pick up all of these areas, and now what we're finding is that we need to make sure that we're expressing what we're finding is important through the research, through the data, and then the community can help us as we continue to lead the charge in that space. Do you want to say anything in relation to that question?
No, just this next phase will be very important. We received a grant from the Dorado Foundation to study the workforce outcomes. It'll be happening in a couple different Promise programs around the country. We need to secure data agreements with the state for unemployment insurance information. That looks like that's moving along, but I think then we'll really be able to get a grasp on the longitudinal effect of the scholarship.
Sorry, we don't have a whole lot more there, but we know that's important. Thank you very much. Hey,
Let's get this.
human capital.